Built lots of bridges. We got lots of work to do.
I think they're hot now. Not yet. They are now.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I've heard a couple of stories about how bits of life. So years ago, man.
One. Okay. Dr. Seiberg, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Good morning, members of the commission. Let's go down the roll real quick. If you're there, just holler. Dr. Bullock. Mr. Childers.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Dempsey. Dr. Fleming. Ms. Janeski. Freeberg is here. I see you. Dr. Graham.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Hyatt.
Here.
Dr. Houston, you're here. Mr. Lakis. Okay. He's muted. Okay. Okay, thank you. Mrs. Jones.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Locklear.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Loftus. Okay. Dr. Marr is here. Dr. McIntyre.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Miller is here. Dr. Weddington.
Here.
Thank you. And Dr. Wood. We have quorum.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome commission members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, and online listeners to the September 24th, 2018 meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This Standards Commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of educator preparation programs. My name is Patrick Miller. I'm the chairman of the Professional Educator Prep and Standards Commission, and I call this meeting to order. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website, www.ncpublicschools.org, on the State Board of Education meetings link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the eBoard agenda. This is a reminder that today's meeting is 2 hours due to member availability and will end at 11 o'clock instead of noon. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this commission. Does any member of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Commission members, you have had an opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve this agenda for September 24th, 2018 meeting?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for today's meeting. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda has been approved. Thank you. The minutes from our previous commission meeting on August 9th, 2018 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
So move.
I have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from our meeting on August 9th, 2018. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes have been approved. I would now like to call on Dr. Tom Tomberlin to provide the Board of Education updates and to present 2 items for action. Dr. Tomberlin.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Green. Miller, I'm sorry. Good morning, Commission members. As Dr. Miller indicated, earlier this month, I presented to the State Board of Education on the request for permits to teach for teachers in North Carolina whose license had expired on June 30th, 2018 as a result of failure to meet their licensure exam requirements. And so just want to go with you over briefly what we have learned about those requests that have been made. So just to remind you very quickly, the target population here were educator prep completers with an initial professional license that expired on June 30th, 2018, who did not have a passing score on their required exams. Also, lateral entry completers with the 2018, June 30th, 2018 expiration who had not completed their testing. I want to be clear about this, that we did not allow lateral entry completers who failed to finish their coursework to apply for a permit to teach under this. This was restricted only to those not passing their licensure exam. The State Board of Education has a different process for those who don't complete their coursework on time. And then also educator prep completers with an IPL that expires June 30th, 2019, who do not have a passing score on the required exams. That's because that would be their second year of teaching, and that they would, the license would be forfeit if they did not pass the test by the deadline. And then finally, educator prep completers with an initial license that expires on June 30th, 2020. These folks have a requirement to attempt the test, and we found that there were a number of those who did not make that attempt in their first year of teaching. So the requests for permits were issued to the LEAs and charter schools on August 1st. We've received requests from 50 of the 115 LEAs, so a little less than half. 7 charter schools responded to the request. That's not surprising, given that charter schools don't have the same requirement for licensed teaching staff as public schools do. In total, there were 298 requests for a permit to teach. Given the missingness in the data, we would interpret any of these statistics I'm about to share with you cautiously. They may not represent what's actually going on across the state, and we will be communicating with the field soon about getting all these permits to teach in, because an analysis of the licensure data and the payroll data indicates that there are many more teachers out in the field teaching with an expired license than we have permits to cover. So there's clearly an issue going on here, and we have to have better communication and get those lists out there. Mrs. Jones.
So Tom, is it possible for at PANC, which I believe you and Dr. Petrie Martin will be part of in October, for you all to have this conversation at that point? Because I know just from my conversation with several districts, it was very difficult for them to track initially, right. And some of them were experiencing problems with submitting the data. So if right. That's something that, and you may already have that on your agenda to cover.
Yes, we do. We're going to work with the State Board of Education, with this group actually, and the State Board of Education about establishing a date. We have to have a date which we're going to cut this off and say you got to have it in by this date. But we will also want to work with all districts across the state to make sure that if they have teachers that need a permit to teach, we help them get those on there. And we're doing work on our side of identifying the teachers from the state perspective. You can imagine for the large districts it's a hard lift to do. It's really hard to do it from the state side, but we're trying to get a list of those teachers and maybe push them out to the LEAs and say these are your teachers that are in problem areas. Really quickly, the reasons that we have for this, you can see that in the yellow, these are our did not attempt in the first year, which is about a third, well, a little more than a quarter of the recipients. We feel this is just generally a problem, that people aren't even attempting the test. This shows maybe a misunderstanding about what the requirements are. Is this a problem that licensure should have better communication with initially licensed teachers? Do the LEAs need better information about tracking these folks? Do we need to work this into our beginning teacher support process to make sure that questions about attempting and passing the test are part of the mentor-mentee relationship? And then you can see that the failure to pass in the second and third year make up the bulk of these requests. We also wanted to look at this by student population. So we looked at where these requests for permits to teach were coming from in terms of student population served. And you can see at the bottom of this graph, so schools in the lowest minority quartile had very few percentage-wise of these requests to permit to teach. So schools that are serving non-minority populations, this is not really a problem. But if you look at the third and the fourth quartile of minority, these are schools that are serving our highest minority student populations, and they make up about 3/4 of the requests for a permit to teach. So this is concerning to us that the inability of the teachers to pass the licensure test is concentrated in schools that serve high minority populations. Again, I can't speak to why they're not passing the test so much, but I just know that those who aren't are consolidated in these schools that serve high minority populations.
So Tom, I'm
Yes.
sorry.
No, that's okay.
I feel like the need to put in a little bit of a qualifier there in saying that we have identified that the test is a problem. At least one of those tests are a problem, and that there are several licensure testing related issues, from reciprocity with out-of-state to teachers in-state who are taking tests that should never really have been required because they're not in legislation. So I feel like when we put data up there like that, it looks like we're hiring teachers who are not qualified just because they can't pass the test. And I believe you've done a presentation on about the fact that there's not a correlation necessarily between student achievement and the pass rates for teachers. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
So, as I said when I started, these data are limited, and I don't think we should draw too many conclusions with this, but I do think if this equity issue is something we keep an eye on, and we know that these schools that serve higher populations of minority and EDS students also have lower percentages of their teachers as being effective or highly effective than these other schools. So this general trend fits what we see when we look at the data from other lenses in terms of teacher effectiveness and things like years of experience, attrition. These kind of negative factors are generally much more prevalent in schools that serve higher EDS and minority student populations. But your point is well taken. And then we looked at this by low performing school status from the 16-17 school year. This actually reflects the population of low performing versus non-low performing, so we didn't see anything really disturbing or alarming here. And that's maybe a little bit of good news in this. And then finally, we looked at requests by LEA urbanicity. So if you start on the left hand of this, it goes from rural, remote, and then it goes all the way up to city, large city. So the more to the right you go, the more urban the setting. And you can see that the problem is what we would expect. The permits to teach are affecting more rural and more urban districts, and they are generally the ones that struggle with human capital issues more than other districts. The ones in the middle, the towns and the suburban districts, generally seem to be shielded against these issues. And so we need to think about this.
What other urban area besides Charlotte are we talking about with this 90?
So that 90 would include Charlotte, Wake, Fayetteville, Greensboro. There's a we have an education directory called EDI, and they classify the districts according to these delineations, and I just picked those up to classify the requests as they came in.
Okay, so 90 is the actual number.
Yes.
So percentage-wise, that's probably not as disturbing.
Percentage-wise, that's about a third, right? Are coming from large city. If you include mid-sized city, that's gonna put you up a little less than half.
Thank you.
But
Of those that have requested permits to teach now.
Of those who have requested permits to teach now,
50.
correct,
That's
Right.
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 which is less than half of our
Right.
LEAs.
Got it. Got it.
And then finally, we looked at growth under this. And so I didn't look at all growth because originally when this started out, the problem was presented as largely an elementary problem because of teachers' inability to pass the math test. So I went back and looked and said, of these requests, how many of these teachers have EVOS in reading, math, or K2 literacy? And as you can see, 89 of the 298 have an EVOS growth score. Now, the growth scores look fine. They don't look particularly skewed towards the does not meet expected growth, which goes back to our finding that the math test is probably not telling us a whole lot about the teacher's future effectiveness. But what strikes me about this is these requests, less than a third of them are teachers that are teaching in elementary school and receiving an EVOS score. And so I'm concerned that if the problem is with elementary teachers not being able to pass the math test, why we're not seeing more of those teachers showing up in the data as requesting a permit to teach. And is that because, is it a reporting issue? Is it because those teachers are doing something else in those schools other than teaching a traditional elementary program? I don't know. It just seems like a low number to me, given the number of requests we had. I would have expected more elementary teachers with EVOS scores to be in that request than what we saw. I'm happy to take any questions on any of this if anybody has any.
Connie, I have a question. Back to the request by the urbanicity.
Yes.
You stated these are numbers, and you mentioned that the 90 in the urban would be 1/3 of the entire state. Is that correct? Because I'm thinking you're looking at these urban cities where their populations are so large compared to these small rural communities. I wonder how that percentage would be compared to the teachers and the students. I mean, when we look at it percentage-wise, because I think that 90 just makes it, I mean, looking at that, it makes this look very skewed.
Right.
And I mean, I think the percentage would look much more presentable because I think this data is not, the way it looks now with just numbers, I think it's skewed.
So I don't disagree with you. If I presented this as the percentage of the request, it would have the same visual effect. What I would need to have is the entire population of those LEAs across the state and the percentage of their entire population that's requesting a permit to teach. However, I also don't have that for everyone. So the data will be skewed no matter how I present it. And I thought maybe just numbers right now would suffice. I don't mean to suggest that I think it is evident that there is less of a problem in rural or what we would call ex-urban settings than there is in rural or urban settings. I think that's the message I'm trying to say. Not that this is disproportionately affecting large urban districts. I don't think that's the case at all. I just think the data are at those two ends of the spectrum.
This may be kind of a ridiculous question. How does a teacher, who informs a person that has an expired license that it's expired and here's 1, 2, 3, 4 you've got to do or you're through? Where's that come from?
So that is going to need to come from the state, the licensing, the Office of Licensure here in DPI. So we currently have these identified folks, but as you can imagine, we're going through every single request to make sure that that person really does need to either have their license expired or they need to be taken off their current license and put on a permit to teach, because this represents a loss to these individuals, and they deserve, you know, as much due diligence as we can give them.
But they do get an official kind of letter that
they will get a letter telling them what's happened and how they remedy that, and that by the end of June 30th of 2019, that permit to teach expires and there's no other path.
Do you send it as a registered letter or?
We'd have to work with legal on this, but my preference on this, and our director of licensure is not with us today, but my preference would be that we'd have both a letter going to the individual and to the LEA that's employing the individual, so that everybody's clear.
Do a good job of letting us know when our CEUs are up or when our licensure needs to be renewed. So, I mean, I can't speak for every LEA, but.
Well, to Freebird's point, we do in the normal situation, right? But I think to your point, we have this X number out there that really you've not heard from the LEAs about, and so we have teachers out there without a permit to teach. No one's applied for that on their behalf, and it could be, I guess you all are matching that with payroll, and you know they're working somewhere, right? So then the LEAs need to get that information if they've had a change in licensure specialist at the LEA or a change in their HR administrator. Sometimes those things fall through, they just fall through the hole. And so hopefully, to his point, LEA's gonna get something and the teacher will get something, right?
Well, at some point, there's going to be a property right issue that you no longer can I earn a living, and nobody told me.
Right.
What I would say that the majority of the LEAs out there are, as to his point, we're right on that, right? We know, but the larger you get, the harder that type of thing is to track, right? So that becomes a monumental issue when folks come in their own tiered licensure pathways, and then one individual or two in a county the size of Wake or the county the size of Charlotte, you know, and I'll even go as far to say like Guilford, and they're trying to track these folks from the onset of, you got to temp the first year, you got to pass by the end of the second year, but oh, by the way, while we're doing that, we're tracking lateral entry too. So to your point, somebody has to own that, and it sounds like the state is working very hard right now to help us close that gap, right?
Yes, that is the case, and I think the point you made about it's hard to track in the first year, second year is absolutely true, because what we're seeing, I think, in the permits to teach is mostly the third years are the people that are their third year, they send off a red flag in the LEAs, and I think the LEAs are aware of it. Now, some of these teachers, their license will expire, and the LEA chose not to request a permit to teach. The policy states it's not automatic. The LEA has to say, that is an effective teacher I want to teach. So we have to imagine that there's a fair number of these that are just being allowed to expire, and the LEA is not taking any action to renew the license. And that's, not to renew the license, but request the permit to teach. The problem seems to be, the biggest problem that I'm seeing in the data is the second year, We've got, from what I can see, we've got about 1,700 teachers that are employed right now that we have no record of a test. And so we're going to have to, that's going to take a lot of work to go through all those. Now, not all of those should have an expired license, but that's the list we're going to have to start going through individual by individual. And they deserve that attention. Every single one of them do. So we will make sure we give them that due consideration and act appropriately.
Andrew, this is Connie again. I have another question. Going back to the slide, request by student population, looking at the highest, the quartiles with the minority, the highest and lowest quartiles. You stated earlier that you were a little concerned about this and you really weren't, that you really didn't understand the cause. I think that's what you said in reference to that. Do you think that this may have something, this is just my thoughts, as someone said earlier, targeting teachers, and you're looking at these, if you look at these high minority quartiles and high minority communities, these are probably going to be your high poverty communities also.
Yes, there is certainly overlap.
Do you think there's a correlation there? And that's probably, I mean, when you're looking at recruiting teachers to these communities compared with other communities where they have a higher supplement that they can offer teachers, when you're looking at these high poverty communities, these are going to be your high minority communities. Maybe looking at that, there could be something that could be put in place to recruit teachers to these high minority communities.
I think that is certainly on the state's agenda. I think of what's going on with Leandro and the focus of ESSA to ensure equitable access to effective teaching to all students across the state. I cannot speak directly to any policy levers we might pull at this time in regard to that, but yes, I think you're hitting on something that's concerning on just about any outcome measure we can look at. When we disaggregate it by poverty and race, it seems that the poor minority students are on the short end of the stick, as it were.
Thank you, Andrew.
You're welcome. All right.
All right. What is the date?
Oh, we need to come up with some recommendation. It's on here? I'm sorry. I do have a recommendation for you. In LICN 001, on page 18, under section 1.90, permit to teach, we are recommending that the State Board of Education adopt a policy that the LEA or charter school may request a permit to teach until January 25th, 2019, to be issued for the 18-19 academic school year. This would give folks who have not yet or who are unable to gather this list of teachers that need to be on a permit to teach time to apply for such a permit and still and have their teachers licensed for the school year. That also gives us in the state a little time to go through all these records and make sure we're identifying and able to push out that list to all LEAs. So that is the date that we're.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, Kim and I talked about this a little bit, but I want to clarify this for the minutes. So this permit to teach that we're referencing here is the one that's tied specifically to the testing issue requirements, right? Because part of the alternative licensure route, not to be confused with that route, is the permit to teach, then the emergency permit, and right. Going to residency, right? And I mean, I'm reading that. I just want to make sure that we're clear that this ends January 2019, and it's solely for the purpose of the what we just granted, right? For those that did not pass the test or attempt it. The other permit to teach stays still on the books.
That's correct. Absolutely. So I just want to make sure that if it is not abundantly clear from the way it's constructed, we should make it abundantly clear.
Correct.
We need to, I'm thinking, we could say something like, for the teachers identified in this paragraph, or something to that effect.
Yes, I think so, because that's really tied to that second paragraph under 1.90, not back, it's not referencing back the first. And I understand that, but I just don't think it's
Right.
abundantly clear.
I'm with you. I don't want any confusion. So we can get some, how we want, I'll defer to Dr. Seiberg on how we handle making that little change.
You could say this
We
provision
can make a
expires.
motion to amend to add that language in right now.
Okay.
Something along the lines of this provision expires, blah, 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 whatever. The July 1, 2018 provision expires as of January 25th, 2019, or something like that, Tom. Yeah, I'm sure you can wordsmith that better, but
The exception granted on whatever date
whatever.
expires on January the 25th, 2019.
Kim, can you open up just a blank Word document and have it shared? That way we can type it real quick. And then we approve it, and we'll know what we're putting in there. So the July 1st, 2018 provision will expire, can we just say it like that, will expire on January 25th, 2019? Is that clear enough? Okay, all right. All right.
Okay. Are you making that a motion?
I'm making that a
Dr. Jones?
motion that we amend LICN 001 as presented by Dr. Tomberlin there.
Amend and approve?
Yes.
Right. So we have a motion to amend LICN-001 as presented and to approve that policy as presented.
Oh, there's one other thing on here. I apologize.
Sure, go ahead.
The psychologist.
I think, are we doing
That's,
that?
that's coming up
Oh,
next.
got you. Okay, sorry.
That's not in this.
I just didn't want to approve it without having
Sure.
a question about it.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Who was the first? I didn't hear.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the changes to LICN-001 as presented, and to approve the policy and recommend it to the State Board for their consideration. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? And that policy change has been approved. Thank you. Okay, the Pepsi annual report. Dr. Evans will present the annual report for September 1, 2017 to September 1, 2018 to be approved by the Commission. Dr. Evans.
Good morning, everyone. Senate Bill 599 requires an annual report from Pepsi, and it is due to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee by December 1st, 2018, and then every year hereafter, as well as to the State Board of Education to be approved before it goes to the Joint Legislative Committee. I'm going to give a brief overview of what the report contains. It starts off with an introduction as to what Pepsi is, and then it talks about the membership and the structure of the membership and how they were appointed, and then a listing of the names and the positions of their roles within the education field. Then we go to the roles of who at DPI, here at DPI, are involved with Pepsi. And then the structure of the meetings, as well as a summary of their focus with a policy reference chart as to what was focused on during those meetings. And also for each meeting, we have a link as to where the minutes are, so that that's easy access for anyone looking at the annual report. Then we go into areas of focus moving forward with the subcommittees and what is going to be focused on from here on out, from September on. And this is the structure of the annual report that will also follow for future reports. Are there any questions?
I had spoken via email with Dr. McIntyre, and she had a question about the adequacy issue. And Dr. Seiberg or Dr. Evans, would one of you please address that for Dr. McIntyre?
Sure. This is Andrew. I just wanted to jump in because Dr. Evans wasn't privy to the activity in the fall. But basically, the issue of the definition of adequacy was a hot topic in the beginning of the first couple of meetings with Pepsi, and what actually we convened a subcommittee to think about that topic, and in that discussion, what bore out of that discussion was that there would be less concern about the definition of adequacy if there was more comfort with the tests associated with licensure, specifically the Pearson math test. And so that's how we got started down the path of looking at the Pearson math tests, convening a math stakeholder group to look at possible additional tests. And then later on, as of the summer, then the issue of the Pearson math test showed up for a different context, but the original rationale was to address the issue of adequacy. So that's a little bit of background as to how we have gone about trying to address the topic of adequacy that was brought up back in November.
So that actually means that we wait until the subcommittee on the testing finishes that work and makes a recommendation to the state board, and then we can go back and define that word adequacy in this bill. Is that how you're thinking about this?
Dr. McIntyre, my understanding was that if we could address the issue of the math test, that adequacy may not need to be addressed in terms of the policy itself. But I think at the conclusion of the math investigation and subsequent recommendations to the subcommittee, if that issue of adequacy is not yet addressed and you still feel the need to address it, it certainly can be brought up by this group.
Yeah, I think that there would need to be a language change. I mean, we may feel like it's addressed, but the language actually says adequacy of coursework, and it's not just about math. So we might want to just change some language in it, but that means we wait until this testing issue is resolved, which is fine.
Okay. And we'll make sure that we have that in notes to pick that up at the conclusion of the math, which we're chugging along on, so we should have some resolution on that soon.
Are there other questions for Dr. Evans? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the Pepsi annual report. Have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Can you say who that was on the telephone, please?
Lauren Janeski.
Thank you, Ms. Janeski. So we have a motion and a second to approve the Pepsi annual report. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The report has been approved.
Thank you.
All right, next, Dr. Tomberlin and Dr. Seiberg will present some policy items for action.
Hello again. I am bringing policy eval 002 to the commission for a recommendation to move to the State Board of Education. This is the in-field, out-of-field policy. This previously resided in LICN 001. It didn't.
Wait. Sorry, go ahead.
No, do you have a question?
No, I never mind, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No. So this previously lived in LICN 001, and we felt like it wasn't really licensure policy. It was a federal reporting requirement, and so we've moved it out to eval 002. I think I need to clarify. I think this policy came up for some discussion last time, and I need to clarify what this is about. The federal requirement used under ESEA was highly qualified, and there were certain criteria that were associated with highly qualified. And a teacher, an individual teacher, was deemed to be highly qualified or not highly qualified. ESSA does something different. It looks at every assignment between a teacher and a course and says, does the teacher have the appropriate licensure for that course? So if you've got a teacher who's teaching 3 sections of math, certified in math, but teaches 1 section in science, the teacher's 3 math sections would be in field, and the teacher's science section would be out of field. The teacher, him or herself, is not in or out of field, but those individual assignments. And so for a school, you look at all the courses that you teach, and you determine whether every one of those courses is taught by an in-field or out-of-field teacher, and you divide the number of in-fields you've got by the total number of courses taught, and that gives you your in-field percentage. The federal government wants these reports as part of our accountability system. Our understanding from the federal government is this in no way affects Title I or Title II funding. There's no sanctions if it falls above or below a certain level. Primarily what we're interested in is ensuring that whatever the rate of out-of-field assignment is, that is not disproportionately visited upon students of color, poverty, or exceptional children status. So this would be part of the equity analysis for the state. We would look at if these, for a school with a given rate of, let's say, 5% out of field, do you see that rate that students in those classes that are out of field are disproportionately minority, poverty, or some other kind of subgroup that we're measuring. And so that's the purpose of this. And so we indicate here which licenses would be considered in field or out of field. And according to the policy that we lifted out of LICN 001, teachers with a permit to teach, long-term substitutes, teachers on a permit to teach or an emergency license or on a provisional license are considered out of field. Teachers with an initial license, a lateral entry license, or a continuing license are considered in field if their license is appropriate for the subject that they're teaching. And it could be any license that they have. If they have multiple licenses, we do the test against every license the teacher has to determine in or out of field assignment. So that is the policy, and I think we probably have some discussion about this policy.
So I have a question about that, because the example Tom gave there with the math science, that we're considering a teacher that may be a 25-year veteran teacher that teaches math, and they come to us and maybe they taught science in a non-public charter school or a public charter school where they weren't required to have a license in that area, or they taught in a some other type of private school setting. And now all of a sudden we go through the hoops, we get them licensed by the state with a provisional area added for science, knowing they have time to complete the qualifiers, right? that person is considered out of field, yet a lateral entry teacher or a residency teacher, and I understand that lateral entry teacher could take the test in science and that's the qualifier. But all of a sudden we're saying they're in field just because they have a 4-year degree, they've taken the test, they have no pedagogy other than passing the test, and we've already established that there's very little correlation between student effectiveness and passing a test. So I struggle with the fact, even if there's just a reporting requirement. ESSA now allows us, since No Child Left Behind went away, ESSA allows us to say, as long as the state provides a license for that area, that person can be considered highly qualified. So why are we still separating out or sifting through and saying we're going to consider the, now I understand if I've got that principal who has not gone through HR and has a teacher teaching out of field and we've not applied for a license. That's the old definition of being out of field. You know, they're teaching math and for some reason I find out when I walk through at open house that XYZ teacher also is teaching a section of science and they're not licensed. Well, immediately I'm asking that principal, you know, that teacher needs to contact HR, we need to get them a provisional license or else they're going to be considered out of field. Well, they're out of field either way. So why would we go through making a teacher pay to get a license for that area if we're still going to consider them out of field? And y'all may have other thoughts on that, but.
Well, I do want to articulate the position of the State Board of Education in terms of this policy. So the point you raised is true. You could have a science teacher who's done a lot of outside work or work we don't know about in teaching mathematics and would be a great teacher to teach those students. The problem is in policy, I can't distinguish that teacher from a PE teacher who's provisionally licensed to teach advanced math and may not have any math credit. So I have no way, both those teachers are considered in field. So how does the policy recognize that this teacher may be an appropriate, may have all the experience he or she needs to teach that class, and therefore should be identified as in field, but this other teacher who has no business teaching that class should be out of field? And I don't know if the policy can do both, because the reality is both examples exist in the field. There are teachers on both sides of that issue, and we have no way to distinguish between them. The reason that we've pushed it this way is we decided to focus on the content. The content is the driver, not the preparation. What we're saying is this teacher has had adequate content to teach that particular subject. And that may not be the right way to do it, but I'm just telling you how this determination came about. Because when we're talking about a permit to teach or an emergency licensed teacher, we're saying that we know that the content is not sufficient to qualify for another path. And that's why we drew the policy that way. But this is certainly up to discussion by the commission to take to the board.
What are the ramifications for the district? It sounded like, I think, and you mentioned that it's just a reporting requirement. Would that particular would that teacher come up as a salary exception or anything that would be an issue for the district?
No. Mm-mm.
No.
It just is not logical.
Yeah, for the district, they're, depending on how it's reported, particularly looking at the equity concerns, it could be some bad public relations if you had high
We have to
percentages
report
of
it.
people
To
that
your
are out.
point, the bottom of that policy, we have to send out a notification to parents of professional qualifications if it's a Title I school. Yet I can have a lateral, no offense to lateral entry, because we've had teachers of the year and great folks. I can put a lateral entry teacher in there with either a test or some coursework, and that person is considered in field, and I don't have to notify parents. But I put a veteran teacher, whether it's an art teacher, a PE teacher, somebody that spent X number of years in an educational setting, getting professional development in lots of different areas, and has been through an approved program, and I give them a provisional license, I've got to report them as being out of field for that purpose. And, you know, I understand that it's just a reporting requirement. It just does not, it's hard to, it's not palatable to be able to say that I've convinced a teacher that's a veteran to take a class because this is their area of passion, or this is an area that, you know, they've worked in at some point in the past, and we get them provisionally licensed and we meet the state requirement for licensure, yet we don't meet it for being in field.
I hear you, but I don't guess we have an alternative, do we?
Well, and I don't mean this sarcastically, but do you have a recommendation for us to consider that would be different?
I do. I'm not sure why we don't add the provisional licensures to the category, the same category as the lateral and the residency. Why would provisional not be included with that?
Is that an option, Dr. Tomberlin?
You can recommend anything you'd like to the State Board of Education. I do have to say this policy reflects the existing State Board of Education approved policy. So all we've done, we haven't changed anything on this policy that wasn't that the State Board approved. We just took it out of LICN and dropped it in this new policy. So you could certainly make any change you want. I cannot speak to how the board would receive that.
And I understand that. I understand it's the exact same language, but I see this commission being tasked with fixing some things that maybe have not made sense for a number of years. You know, and in talking with other HR folks in the field, the same question comes up. You know, why would we consider our provisionally licensed veteran teachers out of field when we're not, you know, and we consider these other folks who have come in by, and we need those other folks. I want to continue to say that, but they're highly qualified and in field, and our veteran people who we've added the provisional to are not. I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult.
No, I don't.
It doesn't make sense.
I have a suggestion,
certainly
and it may or may not be accepted, but if there's no time constraint on sending this policy to the state board, is this something that could be discussed at PANC in October and get a majority or at least a consensus among the HR folks in PANC and then move forward with that?
Sure. So we will have state PANC. We can raise it at state PANC, and then we will also have an intervening teacher recruitment and retention task force that we can bring a recommendation to the commission from them as well.
Dr. Jones, is that?
It is. I will just say that someone texted me because they're listening in and had a very good point that the sole purpose for this policy at the time was because of No Child Left Behind.
That's not correct.
This
was changed after the sunset of No Child Left. And ESSA came into effect. We eliminated highly qualified language out of the policy.
And changed it over to match this ESSA.
We didn't make it, highly qualified doesn't match this definition. This definition was created as a response to ESSA, and then we took that back to the board. Okay. I can't remember when it was taken, but the board approved the policy as it looks now after the sunset of ESEA and the advent of ESSA.
Sorry, what was your question?
I was just asking if anyone was opposed to tabling a vote on this policy so that the personnel administrators of North Carolina PANC can have some input on this in their conference next week.
I think that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Everybody on the telephone okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll move in next to the change in LICN-001 that affects school psychologists.
So this again is a different section of LICN 001. This is section 1.55, eligibility for provisional licensing. And so the rules related to school psychology it has come to our attention that the national certification for school psychologists uses the same licensure exam that the state uses to license its school psychologists. So this provision just allows for the national school psychologist credential to be used as a means of meeting the standard, the license exam requirement. And so the candidate for licensure could submit either their test scores or this certification to licensure for the purposes of receiving the license. We do make it clear in this policy that, and I want to be very clear that this is not what we would call reciprocity. We're not saying there's something, here's our test and here's your test and they're different, but we're going to call them the same. This is, here's our test, here's your test, and they're exactly the same, and we're recognizing that they're exactly the same. We will only grant this insofar as the national license continues to use a test that is the same as North Carolina's test for licensure. If that changes, then the state board reserves the right to withdraw that approval and can reevaluate that relationship. Also, the request from the consultant, the DPI consultant in school psychology, is that they're concerned about the length of time it takes to clear a license for school psychologists, and they've asked to stipulate that a school psychologist license shall be issued to the individual within 30 days of submission of a completed application. And so that would put those school psychologist applications to the front of the queue from terms of licensure.
So I have a question about that.
Sure.
So how can we put any type of timeline in there for one category of certified staff and put those folks ahead of teachers?
I think that is a concern.
So that's not something that I could even vote for, because to put a 30-day window in there for one category, and we need school psychologists, so I'm not saying we don't. Sure. But I'm just not certain why we would not put 30 days for teachers. Teachers may be sitting for, and this is not a reflection on licensure either, because they're processing lots of licensure requests. But they could be sitting for several months. And in some districts, those teachers are paid on the substitute teacher salary schedule until the license is issued, and then it's retroed back. But then here we're taking and saying we're going to take a category, make it different than all the other certified licensure categories, and put a 30-day requirement on that for DPI to issue a license. That just doesn't sound reasonable.
Go ahead.
I'd like to comment on that. I understand what you're saying, Glenda, fully. Recognize the difficulty and time frame that teachers have getting through the licensure process. But there are different categories.
Mm-hmm. True.
And with the social and emotional issues that kids are confronted with now, and our ratio of like 1 to 5,000 or whatever, school psychologists to student population, I think there's an urgency here that can be addressed, because I also don't think we're going to be overrun with people, school psychologists, who are going to rush to the door because this new policy exists. I am totally in favor of the policy. I think it makes absolute sense and probably ought to be applied as quickly as we can across the board, where other teachers, and I know we do that in reciprocity, but where there's exact alike conditions, there should be no question. There ought to be a 30-day window on all of those. But I'm going to vote for it and fully respect what you're saying. I've been living with the same teacher for 52 years.
Right. So to that, Dr. Houston, I will say that we go ahead and hire these folks before they get licensed by the state, just like we do any other teacher. We go ahead and hire them. To put a 30-day application or a licensure completion date in there for that mental health category, so then our social workers are a huge part of our mental health team in the school district. So our school social workers, our psychologists, our EC teachers, our speech pathologists, all those folks are part of that team. And we hire them, and then we make application for license for all of them, including our teachers. But this is pushing that one group ahead of all those others. So, I mean, I understand what you're saying, because I do understand the mental health needs in our school districts. It's just, it's an anomaly that we're creating to put in policy, and it just doesn't seem to be a very good reason behind that, because you can't do it for all the categories of folks.
I'm with you, I understand.
And nobody's being denied employment, right?
no.
I mean, so if teachers are getting hired before, and I know they're hired
Right.
before their license comes through. I mean, we have folks that graduate in May and they start working.
That's right.
And then their license gets processed and everything's fine. So everyone who's working in a public school is hired and then licensed when the license comes through. Yeah, I'm not sure why we would, and I'm with Dr. Houston, and I'm going to vote for the policy because it makes sense. It's the right thing to do. I just don't understand the timeline, putting a timeline constraint on the.
What is the advantage of the 30-day timeline for the individual?
From whose perspective? I mean, or who, I
I mean,
mean,
everybody wants to be licensed more
right,
quickly.
I
But
mean,
So I guess, Tommy, it would go back to the fact that the difference here being there are still districts that are hiring teachers and putting them on the substitute rate of pay until their license is issued by the state. And, I mean, we're not one of those districts. You know, we go ahead because we know these folks can be licensed and we feel very comfortable doing that. But there are districts that do not feel comfortable doing that. They're not certain that this person's going to be licensed or that, but they hire them. To Dr. Meyer's point, they hire them and they bring them on board. It's just, where did 30 days come from? Just out of the blue for one category of staff, because they're all needed.
so, I think so this policy is related to some original legislation that was presented in the last session that the bill did not make it through.
Right.
And in that bill was a provision that those licenses be cleared in 60 days, from 60 days of submission. And I think that was in the original policy you had. And I had an email from the DPI consultant saying, could we change it to 30 because 60 days was actually longer than most school psychologists are waiting for their license to clear. So I think the 30 from the 60 is because it's representing, it sounds like on average it's taking somewhere between 30 and 60 days to get a school psychologist license cleared. And the push is to make it happen sooner. I will say that within LIC and 001, there are a couple of these push to the top provisions. One of them being teachers from out of state that have effectiveness data. They're supposed to be prioritized. Teachers who with military spouse or military connections are to be prioritized. This is another piece of prioritization. And so perhaps the policy to accept the national licensure is certainly great, and nobody's discounting that. It may be good work for this commission and those who may work on a kind of revision of LIC and 001 to take into account, to think about the prioritization of licensure across the state. Are there things that we want to prioritize? And that should be in a comprehensive approach to prioritizing, not just kind of picking certain things and saying, well, that needs to go faster and that needs to go faster. If everything is identified as needing to go faster, then nothing goes faster. And so I think a comprehensive approach to this might be a better solution, to really sit down and say, what do schools need? What are the areas of real critical need that should be prioritized, and put that into policy in a very comprehensive way.
Can that be done, Dr. Seiberg, Dr. Evans, and licensure subcommittee?
We can certainly apply to that subcommittee.
However, I think we ought to go ahead and take some action on the meat
We do.
of the
Yes.
We
of
do.
the licensure issue. And I would make a motion that that the language be accepted as written and moved to the state board as urgently as we can get it there.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the changes regarding the school psychologist in LICN-001 with the caveat to push it to the state board as quickly as possible. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve LICN-001 as presented. Is there any further discussion?
I really would have liked to have seen an amendment to the policy first to take out the 30 days, but.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jones. Is there any further discussion? Comments? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none, the policy passes. Thank you. And Dr. Seiberg, are you going to do TCED 009?
Yes, sir. And this was a quick one. So TCED 009 came to this commission in August, and there was an approval to revise the title and the first sentence there, that this applies to initial professional licenses or residency licenses. And in doing so, what we didn't have in there, which we now have in there, is in Section 2 under the GPA requirements, we had in there degree seeking. And so we're striking degree seeking because this is allowing for students that are not degree seeking to be a part of this process, since we've included residency license in there. So there's just that one little adjustment.
Okay. Any questions for Dr. Seiberg? If not, do I have a motion to approve the change to policy TCED-009?
Moved.
Thank you, Dr. McIntyre. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Locklear. We have a motion and a second to approve the change to policy TCED-009. Is there any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The policy has been approved. Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin and Dr. Seiberg. Thank you, commission members, advisors, and staff for your preparation for today's discussions. I'd like to remind commission members that our next standing meeting will be held here on Thursday, October 11th from 9 to noon. We have now completed our meeting, and unless there's additional business, I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. We have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everyone. We're adjourned.
On this right here, because it doesn't affect funding, everything else is what we do this year. Because it's not really affecting.
I think they're gonna miss totally the election. I'm on the steering committee advisory